famous debate that took place between G.K. Chesterton and H.G. Wells, and it was about how technology will save the world. And about midway through the debate, the sound system broke down. And G.K. Chesterton famously said, technology is not going to save the world. It can't even save H.G. Wells. So,
yeah, it's humbling. I mean, at the end of the day, we screened at Catholic Underground in early October, and the projector, we ran it all day. Projector broke right when we were supposed to hit play. And it was just this thing. And, I don't know, I've been laughing just now because it's I know what the movie is, the spirit is there. We know what it is. And at the end of the day, it's, if anything, it's a gentle reminder. Remember, it's humbling and you know who you are. And it's all good.
I know. We tested it twice today, and it was playing fine.
It's what happens.
Absolutely. Well, we're thankful that you're all here. And it would give us a little more time to talk, which I think might be really insightful as well. So just before that, I just want to note that Chris and Deniz had actually been artists in residence here. So welcome home, and glad that you're back at the Sheen Center. And Joe's been a friend of the Sheen Center for a very long time, and I'm really pleased to meet you, Annabelle, so thank you so much. It was the great Swedish filmmaker Ingmar Bergman who said that art was destroyed when it was separated from worship. And, Pope John Paul II's letter says, right up front that artists need the church and the church needs artists. So who was ever willing to, start off the conversation? Can you talk a little bit about that relationship, about how the church needs art, but how also artists do need the church? Chris is never at a shortage of words, so there you go.
Well, that's a really massive question. But I would say that in order to evangelize, we know that the best way to evangelize is through beauty. You catch them through something that they can't deny. When people see something beautiful, they just have to say, "Oh, that's beautiful." I think that, I would agree with his statement. I don't know when that happened, that separation occurred, but it certainly did occur. Because you can see throughout art, the history of the church, you would always see a development of the arts with the mass, and the two are always the same. So you'd always see the most cutting edge music or the most cutting edge architecture or art being employed in its highest and fullest expression in the liturgy. And then at some point, maybe with the Enlightenment, those two things began to become separated. And then you had art sort of developing in this more secularized sphere, and the liturgy continuing to develop on its own with certain carryovers artistically from the past, but never really developing. So it's this kind of complicated reality of where is art fit in with the church now? And it's an interesting question because we have to kind of reconnect, restitch back together, but you can't just do that by picking up at the Baroque and building these giant Baroque cathedrals anymore or something. So that's what that's kind of...
It's frustrating too because my best worship is with art. When I think of when I'm truly I'm feeling spiritually fulfilled, it's because of art. It's because of film. It's because of something that makes me think in a deeper way. So the separation is it's upsetting and it's frustrating to see that it's there. But it definitely does. It definitely did happen.
I just think that we're meant as artists to serve Scripture. Philippians 4:8 always brings to mind that which is beautiful and pure. Keep on doing what we've seen and heard, and keep serving the beautiful. That to me, it really says it all. That's my favorite line of Scripture. Keep on doing what you've learned and seen and received and heard in me, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely. So I think as artists, we keep coming back to that. And I just think that there's that sense of, we understand apprenticeship as artists. We understand serving the master. and the master is God. And so I think faith and art are inexorably linked. I think that the journey of an artist is one that understands rejection, that understands trying to find the beautiful, and that's also the path of the Christian. That's what I'd say.
Joe, in the film, I think you're really eloquent when you say that, anything that is presented in an authentically true or good way is essentially, is Christian art. And it reminded me of a quote from the late Christian author Madeleine Engel, when she said there is no such thing as Christian art and non-Christian art. There's just good art and bad art. And if it's bad art, it's also bad religion. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how anything that is true and good and beautiful is, by definition, Christian art?
Yeah, it is. No, in the film, I was formed in theology. I'm a Jesuit brother, and formed in theology by this study about Athanasius, who says the logos spermaticoi. I've always remembered that phrase, the logos spermaticoi. The seeds of the word are on all of creation. So our job is to not wipe away that creation when we encounter creation, and it's to glorify it, I guess, and to illuminate it. So you can do that faithfully, or you can do that accidentally. You can do that as a Christian coming into reality and human existence as, with a sort of an overt, or you can do it just because you're just a person who's seeing beauty and true things and just shining a great light on it, wherever you come from, So, yeah, I mean, bad art is hard to watch, and it does make you feel, or to be around, it does make you feel the world is smaller and less joyful because of this, or I'm just not in a good space right now being with this really sad or thing that's kind of nihilistic, and it doesn't draw me to something bigger. Whether I have a religious creed or not behind me, it doesn't open me up, so.
Deniz, some of the subject matters of your film are often, I don't know if you want to qualify them as dark, but certainly complicated and complex. Can you speak to that a little bit, about how, sometimes it just takes a little spark of goodness or light, and that illuminates the whole film. The film can deal with very difficult subject matter, but the idea of it being a Christian work of art can maybe just be that seed that you talk about, or that little spark of goodness within that larger darkness.
Yeah, I mean, in the letters, and I'm going to pull out my phone because I have a bunch of notes that I took on the letter to artists that John Paul II wrote in 1999 that Christian was inspired by to make this documentary. But even in the letter itself, there is a mention of sort of this capturing of reality as it seems to manifest itself to us. And so, and it's deeply personal, and I couldn't right now, at least in the way that I understand things in my relationship to my medium, express something other than the way that I perceive the reality that's in front of me. And one thing that often comes to mind is something. And I'll find the quotes that I'm referring to from John Paul II in a minute. But what somebody like Adorno wrote in Aesthetic Theory is that often we look at art, but art doesn't see us. We see the art; it doesn't see us. So I think what becomes important to me is that when somebody is to make that connection, when somebody goes up to see the film, and like in Simon's Agony, there's this constant struggle of the artist to do what the artist does, which is to make the work, despite the conflicts and all of the obstacles and all the pain and the hindrances. I'm going to keep going. It's going to be destroyed, but I'm going to keep going. And that's also part of John Paul II's letter, that's where that need to create is part of. So that's a personal thing that happened is in the phenomena, in the way that I experience reality in my life, and to say, okay, I'm going to put that into a movie, and now there's this sculptor, and he's experiencing that. So where the glimmers of hope come. I mean, I hope they just come as they come. I hope that in the manifestation of the story, the continuation, despite the thwarting, despite the sculptor's work being destroyed, he continues to create. And I hope that there is something of a brightness there, although it may seem kind of like a despondent ending. To me, it's not. The guy's going, and he's going to keep going.
I want to circle back to that later with a later question. Can we talk a little bit about the concept of being Christians, people of faith, and artists? Joe, you mentioned about I think it was Flannery O'Connor who said it's not the artist's role to clean up a messy world. It's just to open up your eyes and to speak about reality. But she also said, in answer to criticism, that she couldn't be a Christian and an artist, that she responded by saying, well, because I'm a Christian, I can't be anything but an artist. That idea of seeing reality and seeing beauty. Can you talk a little bit about that intersection that you all have between being people of faith and being artists? Do you think that's kind of part and parcel of the same thing?
I think so. I was really moved by what you said in our interview, because I had thought those things before about how you just tell true, authentic human stories, and that's telling the story of Christ. It doesn't have to be specific, but it just does it. And I think a lot of times, and Dennis, you might be able to answer this too, but as people, once you say like, films or anything, people say like, oh, don't you get bothered that there's no religious films? I think that's not true. I think any story that's about the human and a true moment, I personally connected to the faith and to something deeper. So, yeah, they definitely are connected. Yeah.
Anybody else want to share anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, any work that seeks what is true, or somebody who's actually searching for something, it is spiritual. It does point to God. It can be totally secular, and not explicitly religious, or it could be, but it must have that character regardless of whether or not it's explicitly so. And if it doesn't, then it's not really exercising good art. You're not really pursuing both the craft, but also the penetrating whatever the subject that you're trying to enter into and try to be struck by. Yeah.
I just love to add that in the letter to artists, I know it's Christian's favorite part, but the best part really is when he says that everyone is called to make their life a masterpiece, even if they're not an artist in the conventional sense of the word, that the darkness and the light of our lives, like a good artist would look at a painting, just the different components, whether it's the darkness or the light, the joyful, the sorrowful mysteries of our lives, how we take them and sort of fashion that gnarled tapestry into something that turns out to be beautiful spiritually. That's each life's journey as a Christian.
Just a quick. So in part 11 of the letter, so it says. So this is the Pastoral Constitution Gaudium et Spes from the Second Vatican Council. The great importance of literature. The fathers of the council stress the great importance of literature and the arts in human life. They seek to probe the true nature of man, his problems and experiences, as he strives to know and perfect himself and the world, to discover his place in history and the universe, to portray his miseries and joys, his needs and strengths, with a view to a better future. Yeah. So I think that just encompasses so much of our experience as human beings in the world. And whether you're secular or religious, if you can capture that authentically, I think you're probably doing service. I don't think Bergman was particularly religious,
Nope.
but he was so capable of showing us. When I see the movie, when you see that suffering, when you see those people going through all these tangled things and all this confusion and all that stuff, and you can somehow relate to it, and maybe you can walk away and say, I want to change that because I saw elements of that mess that I'm in that film. Maybe I don't want to do that.
Yeah, and I think that speaks so beautifully to each of your vocations as artists. Annabelle, in your segment, you talk about how when you write, you sort of feel God's glory. And it reminded me of the wonderful line in Chariots of Fire when Eric Liddell says, God created me with a purpose, and when I run, I feel his glory, but he also made me fast. That idea of that just doing what you were meant to do is giving glory to God. I'm so glad that you brought up that this is a vocation for everyone, whether you're an artist or not. Joe, I'm sorry that yours was the last segment that we didn't get to see. It had some of the most eloquent moments to it. And one thing that you said is that, as an artist, you refuse to see the world as meaningless and nihilistic. It called to mind a quote from Fulton Sheen. Got to get a Fulton Sheen quote in here at the Sheen Center, where he said that to understand the art of an age, you first have to understand the philosophy of an age. And if the philosophy is ugly and nihilistic, the art will be ugly and nihilistic. So can we talk a little bit about beauty and that role and how beauty can elevate what many people, I think, rightfully see as sort of a nihilistic, ugly culture?
To understand the art of an age, you need to understand the philosophy of an age. And it could be in a counter way. To understand the philosophy of an age, you need to see what the art is doing. In other words, you can understand the philosophy of an age by seeing what art is doing to counter it. If it is nihilistic and cruel. And even in the church, does the church need artists? I was just thinking about this. Yes, sometimes it needs artists to call it back to being the church. It's like, yes, we need you. Really? Do you want us to say what needs to be said? Because sometimes the people who can say it in ways that can be heard are the artists, it's each person, they're going to bring themselves to. I can't answer what Fulton Sheen meant exactly about philosophy and its interchange with the art, but I just know that each person, if you're an artist, you're going to engage with things as they are, and if you've got a depth of spirituality and a depth of religious sensibility, it's gonna that can then puncture what's going on there. So I'm sure I could say a lot more about that, but if other people have things to say.
Anybody want to add anything to that one? No?
I think, like I said, I think his segment really speaks to that. Again, like you keep saying, it's really beautiful. And I remember when you said that part about the world can have nihilistic characters and things, but at the end of the day, it still goes back to hope. I remember when you said that, I just felt like the doors blew open on this whole thing. And I remember that just being like, yes, this is beautiful.
It's even like, I guess I was thinking of something I wrote once. There was a morality play, and it was the good guy the good man who fell, right? And his morality or his ethical life there was no religion in the play. I didn't make it any explicitly religious elements to it. And so it's almost that apophatic sense of you find God where you don't see God. Like we know who God is sometimes by seeing the opposite. And so because this guy perhaps didn't have any ethical or deeper religious grounding in his life, it made him so much easier that he just had a sort of a shallow goodness. And so even though that play was, no mention of God, that it does shine to what God could do.
Let's come back to Simon's Agony for a moment. In watching the film, remind me a lot of one of my favorite authors, J.R.R. Tolkien, and he has this whole theory of subcreation, the idea that we are created in God's image and likeness, and that means that we share in that creative ability, although of a lower degree. And I don't know if any of you have read Tolkien's short work, Leaf by Niggle, and it's about an artist who tries to paint the perfect tree his whole life. And he's frustrated because he can never capture the image that he wants until the afterlife. So can you maybe talk a little bit, because I think that's what you're touching on a little bit in that film, the challenge or maybe even the frustration of being an artist and not being able to achieve, to use John Paul II's phrase in his letter, the glimmer of splendor which flared for a moment before the eyes of your spirit when you began a given work.
Wow. Okay. That's a really big.
Let me say something to help you think for a minute. I think the piece that you just read, when you were reading that, I wanted to say, but was like, that's Simon's Agony right there. That piece, that it just feels so much connected to that.
Yeah, I mean, there is inevitably the phenomenon that you're working with actors and you know the camera turns off and then a moment happens and everybody's just like, why wasn't that part of it? Why weren't we filming? Why, you know? And because you're always catching those glimpses of life in its manifestation. You know, I'm with my 2-year-old daughter looking at the whole universe now in this kind of fresh way, and we're looking at patterns and leaves and rocks and this and that, and it's just it takes the breath and the words completely away. I mean, I don't know what to say about that. It's like we're just, you know, we're like these brittle, dry things sometimes when you look at the whole. I mean, we're not, of course. We have life and we have a lot of glorious moments, but to even approximate what creation is hard. So, or it's even hard to think about it. There's no capacity within me. I mean, I can't. It's just out of reach. And I think that's another part of that letter, that all of these inexplicable things that are always out of reach, and the part of, you know, it's almost, we talk about process and the striving. It almost is more important. You know, it almost becomes about that. And I think in Simon's Agony, that's really where the accents tend to fall, is in the striving. Because in the striving, we never really are concerned with the final work. I mean, it happens to be a significant work because it represents something significant. But even that, which is faith, it represents faith. But even in our faith, it's a constant striving and a constant striving and a constant striving. So, so to bridge, you know, so it's yeah, it's hard
To provide some context too, Deniz's newest film is Simon's Agony, which in his segment, all the footage of him on set is for this project, which was about a sculptor working on this piece that was really his poverty of spirit piece, as you would call it. And that's kind of how all this started to happen. I was involved in that a little bit, and then Chris was on there because he is a sculptor.
He was the art director for the film.
So that's kind of the context of this beautiful short film that Deniz has worked on about an artist who is just struggling to complete this thing that he feels so called to. And then in conversations with Chris, I was kind of thinking, oh wow, there's, you know, that's kind of all of us in a bit. And then that led us to this idea of, you know, well, JP2's letter, let's start a little project. So just a little bit of context. It's a great film too. It's really awesome. So
Can any of the other panelists talk a little bit about that innate tension between trying to create and never being able to fully achieve that glimmer that you see? I mean, I know the two of you work in words, which is slightly different, but not really.
I think I see the glimmer a lot. I think that if you didn't see the glimmer, I think you'd get out of the arts pretty quickly, because you have to. You're going to face a tough road anyway as an artist, as you would with being a Christian. I see the glimmers a lot, but it always just makes me feel grateful to the Holy Spirit. It kind of comes back to that, and it's funny because that's part of John Paul II's letter that I resonate with the most, where he says the more aware an artist is of the gift, the more they realize it doesn't come from us, it's given, and the more it makes us want to sing praise through our work. So to me, I just feel like you have to see the glimmer or you wouldn't keep at it. I also think that sometimes artists can be a little too hard on themselves. Van Gogh springs to mind, where we all see the glimmer when we look at the work of Van Gogh, but if you read his letters, he's so, he can get down on himself. So it just reminds me as an artist to say, keep seeing the glimmers and trust that they're there.
He was a little more than down on himself, unfortunately. He was a little crazy.
real.
Yeah, well, not like him, but and I think the seeking the glimmers or whatever. I mean, that's kind of a natural part of it, and I kind of, I guess, maybe a little bit unlike you, where or maybe I'm misunderstanding, but where you find the glimmers when you're not working or in between things. I like to quote Picasso. He says that inspiration is real, but it finds you working. And that's kind of been my experience, is that when you're in the process of it, you find these glimmers. And then when you step away from it and then you see it and then you're like, oh man, that sucks. And so it's like it's actually when you get space, in my experience, when I get space from something and I look back at it and realize how, like it's not quite there. But I mean, there's an element of the glimmer that's there, but it's just not, it wasn't quite what it was, whatever that thing is,
It's the same.
Yeah.
I mean, it's saying the same thing.
Joe,
Just
did you want
different
to?
times.
Yeah, I mean, as a writer, the idea is to put down as close to the thought or experience as you can. I was once heard Arthur Miller, a couple of years before he died, spoke at the 92nd Street Y. He said, "Writing is the act of trying to get down what you really think." And so when I'm writing like articles, I write articles for American Magazine or essays or even plays, but especially with those like creative nonfictions, like trying to name experiences close to what actually happened as I can. And I can never really do that. I can't take my experience and put it here. I can only get close. But I'll write something and write something and write something again and again and again to try to really get down what I really wanted to say, what I really think. And it's kind of like that. I'm sure everyone experiences that you cannot sleep until you get it, like in a certain way. You cannot rest until you've said it as well as you can with the craft that you have at this moment in your life. I don't know if everyone experiences that, but that's what I'm, just realizing more and more. I just have to keep doing it. Okay, this is the best I can do now, and then let it go and say, this is, just let it go. It's not mine. So
Yeah, that's definitely true. And to speak to the movie, that's how I've been feeling. And I think, again, that's why even in this technical glitch, like, I don't feel, I feel so at peace with everything and the work that I did personally with this. And I felt really called to do it, that it's kind of like it's just like up for adoption. The movie's just out there, and it's like it's everyone else's interpretation now. And like, maybe speak to me a couple months ago and I'd be having a mental breakdown. But it's just, I don't know, you kind of just, like you said, you step back and you go, yeah, I did it. I did what I felt Christ was calling me to, and yeah, and then it becomes the world. It becomes everyone else's.
I think that's a good point too, about when you step away and you realize that how you said, Joe, that it's no longer mine. And I think that there's always another aspect that completes the work, and on your own the work is never completed. But then God kind of sends it out and completes it by an audience, really.
I think that comes back to the point that you made, Annabelle, about in John Paul II's letter, about how not only is he talking about works of art, but the ultimate work of art is each of our lives. And, we aspire to things that we rarely are able to fully live up to. And I think, I forgot who said that, all our lives are unfinished symphonies, and they'll only be finished, in God's time. Each of you, I think almost every one of you in your segments reference early experiences with the arts with either your parents or family members. Can you talk a little bit about the role of, I should say the importance of families, particularly parents or other influential members of your life, to sort of foster and inspire a love for the arts?
Sure. I think, from the segment that you did get to see, it's pretty apparent how my parents did that for me. And now I'm a mother, so with my own children, for me it starts with encouraging them to memorize poetry, teaching them to memorize poetry. What I love about the art of words, poetry, is that it's transportable. It can become part of you. You can memorize it and you can take it with you. And my favorite story for kind of how I learned the importance of it, I always felt it was important to memorize poetry. But back when I was a Catholic high school teacher, I had this thing where if my students were failing, I wanted to give them a chance to not fail. So I'd give them this as an assignment, which is to memorize Hope by Emily Dickinson. And one time a student came to me and said, Miss Moseley, I I thank you for that assignment. You did perfectly, by the way. She said, my parents are fighting every night, and all I hear are curses. And now I have this poem inside of me. And it's almost like a prayer because it's beautiful words that fill me. And when they're fighting, now I say that poem. And so that will stay with her for the rest of her life. And so that's a gift that my parents gave me that I'd like to give my children too.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thanks.
Isn't a teacher, but an educational parent at times too, to a student.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, for us, it was, just being refugees in the United States and kind of navigating a new world. And I think watching my parents navigate a new world, communication, this visual medium of cinema has so much dependent on a particular type of grammar to convey ideas, to convey information. So there was a lot of that growing up. It might have not been this as overt. My father is just naturally a very, very, very a performer in every way, in every part of him. But also an extremely. So it was more. It wasn't so much about like this kind of cultivating, this conscientious, overt cultivating that my parents did, but it was more circumstantial. I think that there was a sense, there was a need that arose out of that. And part of that was language. Part of that was language barrier. Part of that was this constant frustration of my parents navigating the world and being like, why? Why is that happening? Why? So and trying to understand that clarity and how so there was many layers, I think, to all of this. But you end up watching things and you end up being an observer. When you become an observer, you inevitably take an interest in the nuances of that. And I think the dramatic arts, literature and film and all of that tend to lend themselves to that, to working with that, to exploring unresolved ideas also.
Yeah, for me, my family situation was quite unique, and we've actually spoken about this before. I was adopted, and I'm originally, and this is something we connected on because I'm from Romania, and I was an orphan, and I was saved, and my whole family experience was watching my parents navigate what it's like to have an adopted child from a communist country, and witnessing them going, they seem to be very confused about this. No, but the truth that came from their decision to be really honest with the faith in the family, Christian was my birth name, which is really unique. Yeah, and which is wild. And so I love explaining to people how there's no H in Christian. It's Romanian. It's awesome. But throughout my whole life, there's always been this shred of truth of saying, like, hey, we're going to tell you how it was. This is how it is. And we're going to say that with our faith. We're going to say that with arts. And I remember my dad always showing me movies, always showing me everything, and not holding back and saying, well, if you're going to watch this, we're going to learn about what this means and how this contributes to the world and to Christ. And so there was always just this truth. And I was always fascinated when I'd meet other families, other people, and there wasn't that truth. I'd be like, what is that? And that's something we connected on, too, when we first met. I remember saying, oh, wow, this different world, I guess. But yeah.
Let's talk to something very practical, particularly practical here for this art center. What do you think the role is of the need for community among artists, particularly creating community? A facility like the Sheen Center, which tries to create a locus, a safe place for artists of faith to come together and create community. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll speak about that. I got a lot to say. No, what I do think, in general, is artists need to not just survive but thrive as individuals, because we have what's called, I've heard this, a great phrase, scarcity mentality rather than abundance mentality, rather than expecting or having the dignity to say, I should be paid for this work and I'm worth my keep, and to rather than just grasping at straws and being frantic and expecting little, but to have sustainable lives that are built in community with like-minded people that are full of joy and hope. And the illusion of the tortured artist, certainly there are, but those are sort of caricatures that, dot the culture, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can be a joyous, sustainable life. so, and you do need a community, absolutely. And a couple of us here have talked about this. The Catholic Church, which believes in this stuff, has to step up more and say, this is, we're going to not only kind of talk about it, but we really want to give a space to nurture these folks. And the schools do it very well. I mean, I know the Jesuit schools do it very well, but even those are very expensive. But anyway, so yeah, community is huge, and some of us build community with each other. Because, in some ways you can feel odd as a Catholic, a serious Catholic who's practicing their arts in a place like New York City. But there's more out there than you think sometimes. And people are not simplistic and just secular or anti-Catholic or, down with the church. People are actually open-minded. I've never been criticized openly for being a Jesuit or a Catholic or had people attack me or whatever. So there's a lot of hope out there, but we do need to build community, and we need a church that makes that happen also. So,
Oh, well, and I just kind of add to that a lot of times that happens. There's that aspect of the kind of an institutional aspect that provides a space, and then there's the other aspect, which is sort of reliant on real friendships that just kind of organically develop, and that's also something like you can't have one without the other to have a thriving arts community, because it has to be based around friendships and things that happen almost by accident. And I just wanted to add one point to what you said, which you were going on about how this idea of the suffering artist is kind of a scarcity and a caricature. And it really is. I mean, artists actually, for the most part, 100 years ago, actually lived relatively normal lives. And the idea of some artist who nobody knew about their work until they were dead type thing, which is what everybody thinks of an artist now, that was like non-existent until like Van Gogh. Van Gogh was one of the only, people at his time that happened to, and that was because he was crazy, and he had people next to him that loved him, that took care of him, but he was crazy. So like most of the artists working were actually very normal people that had normal lives and were integrated in society, but somehow like it just became this thing to be this crazy,
The generation in San Francisco.
Yeah, exactly. Craziness and
all of that.
well, and I do just want to add, because you just made me think of something, the church or the community of the official church. I mean, we're the church, and it's, but the people of God. But it's not always just space or money. It's just like encouragement. Sometimes you need as much as anything. That's great. Go for it. Be impractical, so to speak. And of course, it's not impractical. Arts is the most practical thing it is because it creates the world. But you need people to just have your back and be on your side and be your cheerleader, who are Catholics in some roles like that. So, so that's as important as any other resources, I think.
I just feel the need to speak up now because twice for Van Gogh. I just feel like I have to say a word for Van Gogh, which is because it's come up twice now. I feel, just to say that, he started out trying to be a minister. He was a man of great faith. One of my favorite works to read is Letters to Theo. It talks about a really beautiful friendship between the two brothers. And yeah, he had mental illness, but he also had the kind of work that is, unmistakably inspiring. And I think sometimes, what feeds the other? Was his mental illness fed by a sense of rejection, a sense of not so it kind of goes around. So he to me is a great example of at least a faith meeting art in one person, in a way we don't always think of. And in terms of the Sheen Center, just to say, what a place like this affords artists like us, it's a blessing. Each of us as an artist, we light a candle, like that Mother Teresa line, but together it really does become like a beacon or a bonfire because we gather here in community, and it's a wonderful opportunity.
Can I add something?
Sure. On Van Gogh?
No, not on Van Gogh. Although, and I'm going to try to be as concise and as brief as possible, given the kind of immensity of the subject. But yes, we do talk about that a lot, about community and about what resources we have or don't have available to us as artists who are normal people in the world trying to make art. Cinema, making movies is just ridiculously expensive. It's getting in more and more, it's cheap, you know, when all of this technology has become so accessible. It's almost like pen and paper now in some ways. But the quality at which so many people are used to seeing movies is different. It's made on a multi-million dollar level. And so to get to that aesthetic is extremely difficult. Communities then kind of say, okay, well, we'll absorb you for now. We'll kind of watch your movies. We'll give you encouragement to keep going. But when you step out into the big leagues as a filmmaker, I can't imagine that. I don't know what community is at that point. There's a lot of question marks for me about a Catholic, greater Catholic industry, so to speak, of filmmakers, of community. The film that I made, it comes out of 8 beats. It's an 8-part series, all based on the Beatitudes, created by a nationwide community of filmmakers. We were all from different parts of the country, and we would meet in Google Hangouts to talk about each other's scripts, to give each other encouragement, to share experiences from our shoots. So it was this really unusual form of like trying to understand where we belong as artists, as Catholics, as filmmakers in the present age. There isn't, as far as I know, any kind of a vibrant, you know, studio where you can go and say, hey, like, these are my talents. Will you take me on, for a 2-year contract so I can make some work and grow? And all of us are starving, I think, in that way, especially when you're just beginning to come up. You take an athlete, you put them on a team, you give them 2-3 seasons, and you see, wow, you give them all the resources. They're changing, they're shining. All of, sometimes it goes the other way, of course. But the idea is that we should be given that chance. And I don't see a format quite yet that exists with that kind of a depth and support structure.
Yeah. Maybe that 8 Beats organization on Disney will buy, and then you'll get your theme park ride. So let's go back to where we started with John Paul II's letter. Several of you have referenced lines or passages, but if I was going to ask, for that one line that really resonates with you most in the letter, is there one particular line, or if you've already mentioned one, is there another one? Cristian, don't want to put you on the spot, but start with you.
I'm going to cheat and say a segment, but the artist and the common good. I think everything at the end of the day, if you can't link what you're doing to the common good of some sort and how it can add to that conversation of what good are you bringing, even if it's a tough story that doesn't have that could be heartbreaking, there still could be good in that, and it's teaching something. So I think that's always very important in anything we do, even outside of the arts, is at the end of the day, what did you provide for the common good? And that part was really my favorite.
Joe?
When I was, this came out in 99. I'm not sure when I read it exactly, 2000, 2001. But I was discerning the Jesuits, and I was an actor and playwright here in New York. And so on one level, the idea that the Pope, who I really admired, and I liked his kind of whole thing of social justice and really speaking out for freedom. And so I liked him personally, but then that he would write this letter specifically to artists, and I always loved that he was a playwright and that he was an actor too. So on some level, the idea that there is this thing that exists and that does say that the church needs you is, in and of itself, is great.
Feels good.
Annabelle?
Sure, I would just go back to make your life a masterpiece. So we're all, we're artists up here, but whatever you do, whether you're an artist in the conventional sense of the term or whatever walk of life you're from, to make your own life a masterpiece. That's most moving to me.
Mr. Allis.
I mean, to build on that, I mean, I think that I like that comparison he draws from artist being a creator of some physical object, but then there's the life that life becomes a work of art, and it reminds me of a book by Jean-Pierre de Cossot, which Abandonment of Divine Providence, and he talks about, and maybe it's just a sculpture reference, but he talks about how the block of marble is being chiseled, and it feels incredible amounts of pain because it's being hacked away at, and it doesn't, it protests the work being done to it, because it is if it could think, it would be in an enormous amount of pain, but little does it realize that the master is bringing forth the true form, is releasing the true form out of that stone, and that's exactly what, really, he says we have the project of our life, but in a way it's more that God is modeling our life, and he uses life, and he uses all of these things, and he's always present, and we might be protesting, but he's drawing out the true form out of us. He's not done completing us yet. So that's one of the things that I really liked.
That kind of echoes, Deniz, what you say if we were able to finish watching your segment about, ultimately it's about that, you have used that beautiful term, sigh, that prayer is that sigh. But I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt what you would have said.
Well, I was just from the letter, John Paul II writes, every genuine art form in its own way is a path to the inmost reality of man and of the world. And I heard one commentator, I think was a writer, that was a Girardian scholar, say that when he talked about art, that there was an ontological. Is it ontologically perspicacious? Is it capable of really getting to that heart of humanity? And that begs the question: what is art? And I think we overuse the term oftentimes because every genuine art form in its own way is a path to the inmost reality of man. So that's a pretty high standard.
That is a pretty high standard there. I think my favorite line, and this goes back to something you had said, Joe, about art being the ultimate practicality, and the idea of the line says that art must therefore translate into meaningful terms that which is in itself ineffable. And I think at the heart of all real true art is mystery, and I think that word mystery is so lacking in our world. And whether it's the mystery of the human person or the mystery of God's grace that, I think it was Gerard Manley Hopkins says, grows wild and is nowhere none. So, okay, so let's finish off with two rapid-fire questions. Every artist needs a patron saint. Is there a particular saint that has inspired you?
Sure. Saint Therese of Lisieux for me. And I think a lot of times, right, there'll be a saint that you're drawn to, but there's also saints that adopt us. And for me, it's always been Saint Therese of Lisieux. She got me through the births of my children, and she still kind of continues to find me, even when I sometimes forget to reach out to her. She'll reach out. She's a very good friend, good companion on the journey. Great. A little flower.
Joe?
Sam Shepard's not a saint, is he? Has he been canonized?
Not officially.
Has his cause been open? But people like that just really go for broke in their art, okay. An inspiration is an inspiration. But also, Miguel Pro is a Jesuit, blessed, who was an actor by spirit, a priest in 1920s Mexico, and he was hunted down and eventually martyred. But he was just a joyful spirit who would take on disguises and scurry around Mexico City, saying Mass and supporting the Catholic faithful. He is one of my, he'd just be someone I really have up there for me. And I think of Miguel Pro.
Not an artist, but Saint Telemachus, who is, in a quick little blurb here, traveled from the east to protest the gladiators fighting and was killed in the Colosseum for protesting the worship of idols and watching people do that. I always think of him and I pray to him because I think that there's still a lot of the idolatry going on in the world today, in all different forms, the art world, different things, sports, all these things. And I've always felt that that doesn't provide enough for me in my heart. And so I think about him a lot, and like, what is that? What are we supposed to do with our life today? You know, there's so much worship of things that just don't matter, and that we don't need that, and we need to work against that. So I always think about him. Yeah.
I also love Therese, and she has a beautiful way where I don't know, the little way is very moving. But another saint that I have very much admire, and it's more recent just because I've done a project related to him, is Charles Borromeo, and I like him because he's an example of somebody who had something thrust upon him. I mean, he was from a wealthy family, and he was he became the Cardinal Archbishop of Milan, but he adopted that role fully, but privately, and even his own focus was always on others and the poor, and basically gave the exact model of what it would be to be somebody in a leadership role, whether that be an archbishop or a father in a family, or even like a boss at a job, whereby he still maintained his role and his what was given to his office. He still performed his office, but he really revealed what the office, what it really means to be a king, which is to always place the other first, and that's what he did.
Saint Augustine, I would say. Just reading Confessions, I just found a deep level of artistry, and I was connected to it.
Post-conversion, not pre-conversion. A little bit of both. It was a mixed thing. Absolutely. Well, as we started with that quote about Pope Benedict saying that those two great tools are the saints the church gives birth to and the art it creates. Really, it's the same thing. They're just using different canvases for their masterpiece. So let's end with that final question. The film begins with the question, what is a masterpiece? If everyone could give their definition of what a masterpiece is.
Just very quickly, I read. This is a reflection on. I'm blanking on the name right now, but a masterpiece, essentially, from my understanding, is something that builds upon tradition and then innovates on top of that. So there's a recognizability about its form and its trajectory, but yet it adds elements of form that keep expanding. So it's Kenneth Clark wrote a book, Masterpieces, that I found very inspiring, and that's sort of a crude regurgitation of that.
So it's that tension between the tradition and innovation. Yeah. Chris?
Sort of what he said.
It's kind of two-sided. One, I think, just being a human being and the gift of life, it makes us a masterpiece, especially if we choose to look at it through that lens. So then there's just the breath of life makes you a masterpiece, but then the life that is seeking something deeper that can also make you a masterpiece.
Well, I think, first of a masterpiece is anything created by God, nature, to be made in the image and likeness of God. But on a deeper way, just thinking that, I have a phrase in one of my poems, Unfinished Saints. And that's kind of how I look at the journey we're on. If we make it to heaven, we're saints. So to be a masterpiece would be, kind of to quote scripture, to receive a white stone upon which is written a new name, to receive some of the hidden manna, and to be told, well done, good and faithful servant.
It's to be flawed and to not fight the flaw and let God's Spirit shine through those flaws.
As Robert Louis Stevenson said, that a saint is a sinner who keeps trying. So, yeah. Well, we're going to end with, I think, a real extra treat. We've asked Annabelle to recite or read one of her poems, and we're really just so blessed that she's agreed.
Oh, thanks so much. Oh, my choice of microphones. Thank you. All right. And this is actually dedicated to each person here. Horizon. All parallel lines lead to the horizon. The horizon is the vanishing point. The art instructor tells us this so often, repeating the lesson like a litany to God's beauty. That night, I dream of a long desert road, without cars, without color, with only telephone poles receding into the distance, converging at the horizon. I am walking with tubes of paint in my pocket, adding a sunrise here, a blue Mustang there, but knowing I won't be done until I reach the vanishing point, when I will understand perspective and find myself on a new canvas, leaving footprints of color wherever I go. The horizon will always be there, just ahead. And since we have lived such parallel lives, you and I think someday we will meet there, in that masterpiece, where the journey of each life's artist finally comes to rest.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cristian, can you let the folks know where they can get copies of this film or see this film?
Sure.
See the rest of this film?
Yeah, the rest of it. December 2nd, it will be on Amazon Prime. So if you have Prime, you can stream it there, or you can rent it there. It'll also be on Formed, which is the Catholic, we jokingly call it the Catholic Netflix. So those are the main two areas, yeah.
Great. And again, my apologies. We do have a second part to this celebration of John Paul II's letter to artists, so we will extend tickets to that second part of the event to everyone who was here this evening. It will actually be with Dr. Elizabeth Lev, who is an art historian from the Sistine Chapel, and she will be here later in November. So in closing, we had an event here a while ago, and it was a film, and the filmmaker sent me this quote by Forsyth. And it says, "The principle of art is the incarnation of God's eternal beauty. The principle of religion is the incarnation of God's eternal human heart. Neither can do the other's work, yet their work is complementary. And I wish the divorce between them, art and religion, were more nearly healed. I wish the artists felt more the need which art can never fill, and I wish the religious felt more the need that art alone can fill." I want to thank you for helping heal that divide tonight. Thank each and every one of you, Joe, Annabelle, Cristian, Chris, and Deniz. Thank you very much for the masterpieces that you are. Thank you. And thank you all. Have a good night.